there is a moment that every returning astronaut describes. Not the re-entry, the controlled fury of atmospheric braking, the heat and vibration, and the sudden weight of deceleration pressing the body back into the seat. Not the thump of landing, or the voices of the recovery team outside the hatch. Not even the first breath of outside air, cool and complex, and full of the particular smell of a world with weather and soil and life. The moment they all describe, the one that seems to carry the most weight, the most strangeness, is simpler than any of those things. It is the moment they try to put something down. A pen, a checklist, a water bottle. They release it from their fingers, expecting it to hang in the air the way it has hung for months, and instead it falls. Immediately, without hesitation, straight down. And something in the brain, trained by months of orbital living, recalibrated to a world without persistent gravity, registers that fall as wrong, as a surprise, as something the nervous system was not quite prepared for, even though the mind understood perfectly well that it was coming. Gravity, after all that time, feels like a newcomer. Tonight, we explore what happens to the human body and mind when it spends an extended period in space, specifically the extraordinary and scientifically remarkable story of what astronauts discover when they return. What changes in their bodies, what changes in their perception, what the experience of long-duration spaceflight reveals about the astonishing adaptability of human biology, and the deep, intimate relationship between the human organism and the gravitational field in which it evolved. This is a story told through the experiences of real astronauts who have spent months, in some cases over a year, aboard the International Space Station. It is a story that is, in every important sense, a story about what we are made of and what we are capable of. We have the whole night ahead of us. There is no hurry here. There never is. As we begin our journey tonight, let us first appreciate what astronauts carry with them when they leave, because understanding what they return to requires understanding what departure means. The human body evolved on Earth over approximately 4 billion years of biological history. Every system in the body, the cardiovascular system, the skeletal system, the vestibular system that governs balance and spatial orientation, the muscular system, the immune system, evolved in a specific gravitational environment, 9.8 meters per second squared, the gravitational acceleration of Earth's surface, a constant, ever-present force pulling every cell, every fluid, every organ downward. We do not typically think of ourselves as beings shaped by gravity. Gravity is invisible. It has no color, no smell, no texture. It does not announce itself. We simply experience its consequences, the weight of our own bodies, the need to support ourselves against it, the way fluids settle and structures bear load, without usually attributing those experiences to a fundamental force of nature. But the body knows. The body has been shaped, at the deepest biological level, by the assumption that this force will always be present. Bones are built with a density calibrated to support the body's weight against gravity's pull. The cardiovascular system pumps blood upward against the hydrostatic pressure that gravity creates in the vascular system. The vestibular system, the fluid-filled chambers of the inner ear that detect orientation and movement, is calibrated to gravity's constant downward direction. Even the distribution of fluids in the body assumes gravity. Blood pools in the lower extremities when you stand. The heart compensates. The kidneys regulate fluid volume in response to gravitational signals. The face and upper body are relatively lean of fluids compared to the legs and feet, because gravity pulls fluids down. All of this, the entire architecture of human biology, as it exists at any given moment, is a negotiation with a force that has never, in 4 billion years of Earth life, been absent for any significant period, until an astronaut leaves. Let us follow an astronaut through the first hours of spaceflight and understand what the body immediately begins to experience when gravity is removed. Launch itself is the opposite of weightlessness. It is hypergravity. During ascent, astronauts experience acceleration forces of up to approximately 3 g, 3 times the normal gravitational pull. The body is pressed back into the seat. Movement is effortful. The face feels heavy. Every kilogram of the body's mass weighs 3 kilograms during peak acceleration. Then, within minutes of reaching orbit, the engines cut off. The spacecraft is now in freefall, not falling toward Earth in the ordinary sense, but falling around it, moving so fast horizontally that its downward trajectory curves to match the curve of Earth's surface. The spacecraft is perpetually falling and perpetually missing. This is orbital mechanics. This is what weightlessness is: not the absence of gravity, but the absence of any surface to push back against the fall. The astronaut and the spacecraft are falling together at the same rate, and in that shared fall, there is no relative force between them. The body floats, and in the first minutes and hours of that float, the body begins to change. Fluids that have spent a lifetime being pulled toward the legs and feet by gravity suddenly redistribute. Without gravity pulling blood into the lower extremities, the cardiovascular system, still pumping with the same vigor it used to maintain against gravity, drives fluid upward into the chest, into the head. The face puffs slightly. The nasal passages swell. The sensation is sometimes described as being upside down, that familiar feeling of blood rushing to the head, but persistent, constant, inescapable. The legs, meanwhile, lose the fluid they normally carry. Astronauts describe what they call chicken legs, a noticeable thinning of the lower limbs, as the fluid load they normally bear migrates upward. This fluid shift begins within hours of entering orbit and is one of the first and most immediate physiological adaptations of spaceflight. As we continue, let us explore how the cardiovascular system, the heart, and the network of blood vessels that distribute oxygen and nutrients throughout the body adapts to the microgravity environment of orbital spaceflight. The cardiovascular system on Earth is designed to work against gravity. The heart must pump blood upward to reach the brain, a distance of roughly 30 centimeters above the heart in a standing person. Arteries in the legs must maintain sufficient pressure to return blood upward against the pull that pulls it in the feet. The entire system is calibrated for a world in which blood wants to fall. In microgravity, that calibration is no longer appropriate. Without the pooling of blood in the lower extremities, the heart receives more blood return than it expects. It responds to this increased preload by pumping more vigorously. The fluid shift toward the upper body and head triggers pressure sensors in the vessels of the neck and chest baroreceptors that interpret the increased fluid pressure as a sign that the body has too much blood volume. Overall, the body responds by reducing its blood volume. The kidneys increase fluid excretion. Within the first few days of spaceflight, total blood volume decreases by perhaps 10 to 15%. The heart itself, a muscle, responds to its changed workload. Without the constant effort of pumping against gravity, the cardiac muscle gradually loses some of its mass and strength. The heart becomes slightly smaller and slightly less powerful. This is an appropriate adaptation for the microgravity environment, but it creates a problem upon return. When an astronaut comes back to Earth and gravity reasserts its pull, the reduced blood volume and the slightly weakened heart must suddenly resume the task of pumping against a gravitational gradient. Blood pools back into the legs. The brain receives less blood than it needs. The result can be dizziness, lightheadedness, and in some cases, fainting when the astronaut attempts to stand. This condition, orthostatic intolerance, is one of the most consistently documented post-spaceflight challenges, and it illustrates a profound principle. The body's adaptations to space are entirely sensible adaptations to space. They become problems only when the astronaut returns to the environment those adaptations were designed to escape. Let us explore one of the most significant physiological challenges of long-duration spaceflight, the loss of bone density that occurs in the absence of mechanical loading. Bone is not a static structure. It is living tissue, constantly being remodeled. Specialized cells, called osteoblasts, build new bone. Other cells, called osteoclasts, break down old bone. The balance between these two processes, formation and resorption, determines whether bone density increases, decreases, or remains stable. On Earth, the skeletal system is under constant mechanical stress from gravity. The weight of the body bearing down on bones, particularly the weight-bearing bones of the legs, hips, and spine, provides the mechanical signal that tells osteoblasts to maintain and build bone mass. This is why weight-bearing exercise is recommended for bone health, and why conditions that reduce mechanical loading, prolonged bed rest, for instance, lead to bone loss. In microgravity, the weight-bearing bones receive no gravitational loading at all. The mechanical signal that drives bone formation is absent. Osteoclast activity continues, breaking down bone tissue. But osteoblast activity, without the mechanical stimulus, does not keep pace. The result is a net loss of bone density, concentrated particularly in the load-bearing bones of the lower body. Studies of astronauts returning from long-duration missions on the International Space Station have documented bone density losses of approximately 1 to 2% per month in the hip and lower spine regions that bear the full weight of the body on Earth. Over a 6-month mission, this adds up to a bone density loss comparable to a decade of age-related bone loss on Earth. After a 311-day mission, the kind of extended stay we are exploring tonight, the cumulative bone loss can be substantial. Recovery occurs after return to Earth, as the bones once again receive gravitational loading and remodeling responds. But recovery is slow, typically taking months to years to fully restore lost bone density, and in some cases, the recovery is not complete. As we continue, let us consider what happens to the muscular system during extended spaceflight. Because muscle, like bone, is a biological structure shaped by the demands placed on it. The human muscular system evolved in an environment where muscles were needed for two primary functions that spaceflight eliminates: supporting the body's weight against gravity and moving the body through a gravitational field. The muscles of the back, hips, and legs, the postural muscles that keep the body upright, the locomotor muscles that propel it forward, are among the largest and most powerful in the body precisely because those functions are so demanding. In microgravity, neither function is required. The body does not need to be supported against gravity because there is no gravitational pull to resist. Movement in the space station requires gentle pushes rather than the powerful muscle contractions of walking, running, or climbing. The muscles respond with straightforward biological logic. They shrink. Without the demand that keeps them large, they reduce in mass and strength. This process begins within the first days of spaceflight and continues throughout the mission. By the end of a 6-month mission, astronauts can lose 10 to 20% of their muscle mass in affected areas. By the end of a mission approaching a year, the losses are correspondingly greater. The lower body is particularly affected. Calf muscles, among the most gravity-dependent in the body, can lose significant mass and strength. The muscles of the hip and lower back, essential for the upright posture of standing and walking, atrophy from disuse. Countermeasures are employed extensively on the International Space Station. Astronauts exercise for approximately 2 hours each day, using resistance exercise equipment that simulates the loading of Earth-based workouts. These countermeasures significantly reduce, but do not entirely prevent, the muscle loss of long-duration spaceflight. Upon return, the muscles must be rebuilt, and rebuilding them requires the very thing that has been absent for months: the gravitational loading that provides the stimulus for muscle growth. As we journey deeper into the human experience of spaceflight tonight, let us explore one of the most fascinating and disorienting adaptations. What happens to the vestibular system when the gravitational reference that has oriented it for an entire lifetime simply disappears? The vestibular system is the body's primary orientation and balance system. Located in the inner ear, it consists of two main components: the semicircular canals, which detect rotational movement, and the otolith organs, which detect linear acceleration, including, on Earth, the constant linear acceleration of gravity. The otolith's tiny calcium carbonate crystals embedded in a membrane are displaced by gravity and by linear motion. The brain reads their position to determine which direction is down, and uses that information to maintain balance, coordinate movement, and stabilize visual gaze. In microgravity, the otoliths experience no gravitational displacement. There is no consistent down direction. The signal that has told the brain where down is for every moment of the astronaut's life, a signal present even during sleep, maintained continuously by the resting position of the otolith membrane, is gone. The brain, faced with this absence, must recalibrate. It must learn to navigate space without a gravitational vertical reference. And during the period of recalibration, which typically takes several days to 2 weeks at the beginning of a mission, many astronauts experience space motion sickness, nausea, disorientation, vomiting. The brain receives conflicting signals. The visual system sees a stable environment, but the vestibular system reports none of the expected gravitational input. This sensory conflict produces the symptoms of motion sickness. Eventually, the brain adapts. It learns to rely less on vestibular input and more on visual cues for orientation. It develops a new, microgravity-appropriate sense of up and down, often simply wherever the astronaut's head is pointing or wherever the workstation in front of them is located. The adaptation, once made, is effective, but it must be unmade upon return. Let us explore one of the more recently discovered and most concerning consequences of long-duration spaceflight, the effect of the microgravity-induced fluid shift on the eyes and vision. Among the most significant findings from the medical monitoring of astronauts returning from long missions has been evidence of changes to the structure of the eye and the optic nerve changes that, in some cases, have produced lasting effects on visual acuity. The cause is related to the fluid shift we discussed earlier. As fluid migrates toward the upper body in microgravity, the pressure of the cerebrospinal fluid, the fluid that surrounds the brain and spinal cord and extends into the optic nerve sheath, increases. This elevated intracranial pressure pushes on the back of the eye from the inside. Over the course of months in microgravity, this persistent elevated pressure can cause structural changes. The optic disc, where the optic nerve connects to the retina, can become swollen. The eyeball itself can change shape slightly, becoming less spherical. The visual cortex can shift forward within the skull. These changes are collectively called spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome, or SANS. They have been documented in a significant fraction of astronauts who have completed long-duration missions, and they represent one of the more serious medical concerns for planned long-duration missions to the Moon, Mars, and beyond. Some astronauts returning from the International Space Station have reported that their vision had shifted, that they needed different corrective lenses than before their mission. Some have experienced degraded near vision. The changes are typically most pronounced immediately after return and improve over subsequent months. But in some cases, the changes appear to have persisted long-term. This was not a consequence that was anticipated with great concern in the early days of human spaceflight. It has emerged as a priority medical research area as the duration of missions has extended and the monitoring capability has improved. The body, it turns out, was shaped by more than just gravity. It was shaped by the specific pressure environment that gravity creates. Consider what long-duration spaceflight does to the brain, not merely to its supporting structures, but to the neural tissue itself. Advanced magnetic resonance imaging studies of astronauts before and after long-duration spaceflight have revealed that the brain undergoes measurable structural changes during extended missions. One of the most consistent findings is a shift of the brain within the skull. The upward fluid redistribution of microgravity, the same process that affects the eyes, causes the brain to shift slightly upward, toward the top of the skull. This shift is visible in post-flight MRI scans as a change in the relative positions of brain structures compared to pre-flight baseline images. More subtle, but potentially more significant, are changes in the microstructure of white matter, the neural tissue that constitutes the communication pathways between different brain regions. Diffusion tensor imaging, a specialized MRI technique that maps the movement of water molecules through neural tissue, has revealed alterations in white matter structure following long-duration missions. These changes appear in regions involved in sensory and motor processing and may reflect the neural reorganization that accompanies the brain's adaptation to microgravity. Research published from studies of astronauts who have completed long missions has also shown changes in grey matter volume in certain brain regions, increases in some areas, decreases in others. The regions that show the most changes are those associated with movement, balance, and sensoromotor processing. The interpretation of these changes is an active area of research. Do they represent beneficial adaptations, the brain reorganizing its resources in response to change demands? Do they represent harm, the physical alteration of neural tissue in ways that may have long-term consequences? Both interpretations are possible, and distinguishing between them requires the kind of long-term, follow-up data that the spaceflight medicine community is only beginning to accumulate. What is clear is that spaceflight changes the brain, physically, measurably, and in ways that persist beyond the mission. As we continue our journey, let us follow the astronaut back to Earth through re-entry, landing, and the extraordinary first moments of reunion with the world they left months before. The Soyuz spacecraft, the vehicle that has served as the primary crew transport to the International Space Station, returns to Earth through a controlled re-entry sequence, lasting several hours from undocking to landing. The spacecraft deorbits, enters the upper atmosphere, decelerates through aerodynamic braking, and descends under parachutes before a final soft landing in the steppes of Kazakhstan, cushioned by solid rocket engines that fire in the last meter of descent. Throughout re-entry, the astronaut experiences increasing G-forces, the same forces that were absent for months, now returning with a kind of emphasis. At peak deceleration, they may experience 4 to 5 G, 4 to 5 times their normal body weight pressing against them. The body that adapted to weightlessness for months is abruptly reacquainted with gravity's pull. The landing itself, even with the cushioning of the retro rockets, is a solid impact. The body, which has been floating, is suddenly still, heavy, pinned. Medical teams are waiting at the landing site. The hatch opens, and the astronaut who has not sat up under their own power for months, whose postural muscles have atrophied, whose cardiovascular system has reduced its blood volume, whose vestibular system has been recalibrated for microgravity, encounters Earth gravity for the first time since launch. Most returning astronauts cannot walk unaided in the first minutes and hours after landing. They are helped from the capsule, placed in chairs, examined by medical personnel. Their faces often show the puffiness of the fluid shift, which has not yet redistributed downward. Their legs are thin, their movements are careful and somewhat unsteady, but they are smiling. Let us explore what the sensory experience of that first encounter with gravity actually feels like, because the astronauts who have described it use language that captures something genuinely extraordinary. The most immediate sensation is weight. Not merely the astronaut's own body weight, though that is present and significant. The legs that have been unloaded for months, now suddenly bearing the full mass of the body above them. But the weight of everything. Lifting an arm feels like lifting an arm attached to something heavy. The head, which has floated at the end of a neck for months, now presses downward with its full mass. The eyelids feel slightly heavier. The jaw feels heavier. Even the internal organs, which have been floating freely within the body cavity in microgravity, settle downward under gravity's influence, producing sensations that are difficult to describe because they have no everyday analogue. One astronaut described it as feeling as though someone had replaced the air with something thicker, not liquid, but something with weight and resistance. Every movement requiring effort that it did not require in space. The visual experience is also altered. In microgravity, the body's position relative to the visual scene is irrelevant. Up is wherever the astronaut decides it is, or wherever the nearest visual reference suggests. On Earth, with gravity firmly establishing down, the visual system and the vestibular system must resynchronize. For the first hours after landing, some astronauts experience mild vertigo, the sensation of the world tipping or swaying, as the recalibrated vestibular system adjusts to a gravitational signal it has not received for months. Turning the head too quickly can produce dizziness. Looking upward can feel disorienting. The horizon, which in microgravity is simply wherever the eyes are pointed, now carries the full weight of gravitational reality. It is always horizontal, always down, and the nervous system must relearn to navigate by it. This readjustment takes days. As we continue our exploration, let us follow returning astronauts through the rehabilitation process, the structured medical and physical program that occupies the weeks following return from a long-duration mission. The rehabilitation program for returning International Space Station crew members is typically 45 days in its formal structured phase, though recovery continues well beyond that. It is overseen by flight surgeons and physical therapists who have been tracking the astronauts' physiology throughout the mission and who design the rehabilitation to address the specific deficits documented through pre- and post-flight testing. The immediate priorities in the first days are cardiovascular stability and fall prevention. The risk of orthostatic intolerance, the lightheadedness, and potential fainting that comes from the cardiovascular system's difficulty maintaining blood pressure in the upright position is highest in the first days after landing. Astronauts are monitored carefully during any activity that involves standing or walking. They are given compression garments for the lower body to help push blood upward against the reduced cardiovascular drive. Hydration is also an immediate focus. The body's reduced blood volume, the consequence of the kidneys excreting fluid in response to the upper body fluid shift, needs to be restored. Astronauts are encouraged to drink fluids with electrolytes to support rapid volume restoration. In the first week, the rehabilitation program begins progressively gentle walking, balance exercises, coordination tasks. The goal is to reload the weight-bearing bones and muscles gradually, providing the mechanical stimuli that will drive recovery without causing injury to structures that have been unloaded for months. By the second and third weeks, exercise intensity increases. Water-based therapy exercises conducted in a pool, where buoyancy reduces the gravitational load on the recovering body, while still providing resistance, is often employed. The partial support of water allows the reconditioning muscles to be worked before they are strong enough to safely support the full body weight on land. By the end of the formal 45-day program, most astronauts have recovered their ability to walk, stand, and perform basic physical tasks. But the full recovery, particularly of bone density and the fine motor coordination associated with vestibular recalibration, continues for months. Let us hear, through the accounts of actual returning astronauts, what aspects of readaptation surprised them most, because the subjective experience of these physiological changes carries a human texture that numbers and measurements alone cannot convey. Almost universally, returning astronauts describe the weight of their own head as something startling. The human head weighs approximately 4 to 5 kilograms, roughly the weight of a full bowling ball. In microgravity, the neck muscles that support this weight against gravity are not required in the same way, and they lose some of their strength and conditioning. Upon return, holding the head upright requires effort that was unconscious and effortless before the mission. Some describe the sensation of walking as profoundly strange, not painful, but unfamiliar. The proprioceptive signals from the feet contacting the ground, the pressure, the texture, the subtle feedback of a surface pushing back had been absent for months. The brain, upon receiving these signals again, sometimes takes time to integrate them smoothly into the overall movement pattern. Astronaut Scott Kelly, who spent 340 days on the International Space Station, one of the longest single missions to that facility, described his skin as extraordinarily sensitive upon return. Months of floating without contact with hard surfaces had left his feet in an unusual state. The calluses had softened, unused. When he first stood and walked, the soles of his feet, unaccustomed to pressure, were painful. It was, he noted, as though he was walking on new feet. The bottoms of his feet, which in space had become essentially ornamental, were suddenly being asked to bear the full weight of a human body. He also described lying in bed, actual lying in a bed, on a mattress, under gravity's pull as something he had to readjust to. The pressure of the mattress against the back of his body, the weight of blankets, the sensation of being held down, rather than floating, these familiar experiences felt, after 340 days of floating, genuinely new. As we continue our journey tonight, let us explore one of the most remarkable scientific studies in the history of human spaceflight research, an investigation made possible by a coincidence of biology and circumstance that is unlikely to be repeated. Scott Kelly and Mark Kelly are identical twins. Both became astronauts. Both flew multiple missions to space. And in 2015 and 2016, while Scott spent a year aboard the International Space Station, Mark remained on Earth, providing an extraordinarily rare comparison, an identical genetic baseline, one member of which experienced the extreme environment of long-duration spaceflight, while the other remained in a terrestrial environment. NASA organized what became known as the Twin Study, a comprehensive multi-institutional scientific investigation that collected biological samples and physiological data from both brothers before, during, and after Scott's year-long mission. Researchers from multiple universities and institutions analyzed the data, examining everything from gene expression to cognitive performance to the microbiome of the gut. The results, published in a landmark paper in the journal Science in 2019, were striking in several respects. Among the findings were changes in gene expression, the way genes are read and translated into proteins in Scott's cells compared to Mark's. Thousands of genes showed altered expression patterns in Scott's samples compared to pre-flight baselines. Most of these changes reversed after return to Earth, but a small fraction, approximately 7%, had not returned to baseline values even 6 months after landing. The telomeres, the protective caps at the ends of chromosomes that tend to shorten with age and stress, behaved in an unexpected way. During the mission, Scott's telomeres actually lengthened slightly, then shortened again rapidly after return to Earth. The net effect was telomeres that were somewhat shorter than pre-flight values at the 6-month post-landing assessment. Cognitive testing showed some decline in speed and accuracy during and after the mission, though the changes were modest. The gut microbiome shifted significantly during spaceflight and largely recovered after return. The Twin Study did not find that spaceflight causes dramatic biological damage in a short time frame, but it documented, with extraordinary precision and a level of biological depth not previously achieved, the breadth and complexity of the changes that long-duration spaceflight induces. Let us explore the telomere finding from the Twin Study more carefully, because it is among the most scientifically fascinating and most discussed results, and it carries implications that go beyond space medicine. Telomeres are repetitive DNA sequences that cap the ends of chromosomes, protecting them from degradation and preventing chromosomes from fusing with one another. They function somewhat like the plastic tips on shoelaces, keeping the essential genetic material from fraying. Each time a cell divides, the chromosomes are replicated, and the telomeres lose a small amount of their length in the process. Over a lifetime of cellular division and in response to oxidative stress, inflammation, and other biological challenges, telomeres shorten. When they become critically short, cells can no longer divide normally, entering a state of senescence or programmed death. Shorter telomeres are generally associated with cellular aging and with increased risk of age-related diseases. Given this background, the finding that Scott Kelly's telomeres lengthened during his year in space was unexpected. Spaceflight is a physiologically stressful environment. Radiation exposure, the disruption of circadian rhythms, physical and psychological demands. These factors might be expected to promote telomere shortening, not lengthening. The lengthening that was observed may be related to the exercise regimen that astronauts follow on the ISS. Intensive daily exercise is known to be associated with telomere lengthening in ground-based studies, or it may reflect other aspects of the spaceflight environment that affected cellular metabolism. But the rapid shortening that followed immediately after return to Earth, bringing the telomeres to lengths shorter than pre-flight values, was perhaps more striking. The stress of re-entry, of gravitational re-exposure, of the intense physiological readjustment of the return phase may have driven this rapid shortening. The finding illustrated something important. The relationship between spaceflight and biological aging is not simple. The environment of the ISS is in some respects physiologically challenging in ways that might be expected to accelerate aging processes. But the specific trajectory lengthening in space, rapid shortening on return, was not predicted and is still being studied. As we continue our exploration, let us turn from physiology to psychology, because the experience of returning from long-duration spaceflight is not only a physical readaptation, but a psychological and social one as well. Astronauts who have spent 6 months, a year or longer aboard the International Space Station return to a world that has continued evolving without them. Family members have aged by months, children have grown, Friends have moved, married, changed in ways that 6 months of weekly video calls cannot fully convey. In a more mundane, but surprisingly powerful sense, the world of daily life has moved on. Technology, updates, political events have unfolded. Cultural moments have come and gone. The rhythm of ordinary terrestrial existence, which the astronaut experienced only at a remove during the mission, has continued at its own pace. Most returning astronauts describe the adjustment to what is sometimes called terrestrial noise. The constant sensory input of a world with weather, with crowds, with traffic, and wind, and rain, and the full complex texture of environmental stimuli as something that requires deliberate readjustment. The space station is a controlled environment with consistent temperature, consistent lighting, consistent sound levels. Earth is not. Some astronauts report that the smell of Earth, the outdoor air on the day of landing, the particular combination of organic molecules that constitutes the smell of grass and soil and weather, is one of the most powerful sensory experiences of return. Smell, unlike vision, bypasses the thalamus and connects directly to the limbic system, the emotional and memory processing centers of the brain. The smell of Earth triggers something deep and immediate, something that months in the controlled atmosphere of the space station cannot replicate. But beneath the joy of return, the reconnection with family, the overwhelming sensory richness of the world, there is also something harder to articulate. A kind of grief, perhaps, for the extraordinary vantage point that has been left behind, for the view of Earth from above, hanging in the dark, for the community of the crew, the close-knit interdependence of people living in an extreme environment together. Let us explore one of the most widely discussed psychological experiences of spaceflight, the overview effect, and consider what returning astronauts carry with them, long after the physiological adaptations have faded. The overview effect is the name given to a cognitive and emotional shift reported by many astronauts upon seeing Earth from space for the first time and upon living with that perspective for an extended period. The term was coined by writer Frank White in his 1987 book of the same name, based on interviews with astronauts who struggled to describe a transformation in their relationship to the planet and to humanity. From the International Space Station, orbiting at approximately 400 kilometers altitude, the astronaut sees the entire curvature of the Earth below. The atmosphere, the thin film of gas that makes all life possible, is visible as a gossamer blue line at the horizon. The weather systems are visible as vast, beautiful structures turning slowly over the oceans. The deserts, the forests, the rivers, the cities at night glowing with the particular amber light of human habitation, all visible, all comprehensible, as a single, unified object. There are no borders visible from space. The geopolitical divisions that structure so much of human life on Earth leave no mark on the planet's appearance from orbit. What is visible is a single, continuous, extraordinarily beautiful, and obviously finite world. Many astronauts describe this view as inducing a profound shift in perspective, a visceral understanding of the planet's fragility, the unity of human civilization, and the irrelevance of the conflicts and divisions that dominate so much of terrestrial concern. This shift does not always fade when the astronaut returns. Many describe it as a permanent change in how they see the world, a reference point they return to when confronted with the ordinary conflicts and preoccupations of daily life. A reminder that from a sufficient distance, the things that divide us are invisible. It is perhaps the most lasting gift that long-duration spaceflight gives. As we continue our journey through the physiological story of long-duration spaceflight, let us address a challenge that is invisible, odorless, and impossible to feel in the moment, but accumulates with serious consequences: the radiation environment of low Earth orbit and beyond. On Earth's surface, we are protected from much of the cosmic radiation environment by two shields: Earth's magnetic field, which deflects charged particles, and the atmosphere, which absorbs high-energy photons. The radiation environment at sea level is modest, perhaps 2 to 3 millisieverts per year for the average person, with significant variation by location and altitude. In low Earth orbit, the protection is reduced, but not eliminated. The International Space Station orbits within Earth's magnetic field, which still provides some shielding from galactic cosmic rays and solar particle events. But the atmosphere is absent, and the radiation dose increases significantly. Astronauts aboard the ISS receive approximately 50 to 80 millisieverts of radiation per 6-month mission, roughly the equivalent of dozens of chest X-rays. Over a year-long mission, the accumulated dose approaches 150 millisieverts. Career exposure limits for astronauts have historically been set at levels intended to limit the excess lifetime cancer risk from radiation exposure to approximately 3%. The radiation environment is not merely energetic photons. The most concerning component is high-energy charged particles, galactic cosmic rays from outside the solar system, which can penetrate essentially any practical shielding material. These particles can damage DNA directly, and they can produce secondary radiation by interacting with shielding material, sometimes making the dose behind shielding worse rather than better. For missions beyond low Earth orbit to the Moon, and particularly to Mars, the radiation environment becomes far more serious. The magnetic field protection is lost entirely, and the distance from Earth makes any medical response to radiation illness extremely difficult. Radiation mitigation remains one of the central, unresolved challenges in planning for deep space human exploration. Let us bring the discussion together around the specific number in our title tonight, 311 days, and consider what that duration means for the human body in concrete, integrated terms. 311 days is not the longest single mission by any individual astronaut. Russian cosmonauts aboard the Mir space station set endurance records approaching and exceeding a year in the 1990s. Scott Kelly and Mikhail Kornienko completed a year-long mission on the ISS in 2015 and 2016. More recently, astronaut Frank Rubio spent 371 days in space, the longest single mission by an American astronaut due to a Soyuz spacecraft leak that required his crew to await a replacement vehicle. A mission of 311 days represents approximately 10 months more than 2/3 of the way through a full year in space. It is long enough that essentially all of the physiological adaptations we have discussed are well established. The cardiovascular adaptation is complete. The bone and muscle losses are substantial. The vestibular system has been recalibrated for an extended period. The brain structural changes documented in long-duration studies are likely present. It is long enough that the return to Earth gravity is not merely uncomfortable, but genuinely physically challenging. The astronaut who returns after 311 days does not simply experience the mild readaptation of a short-duration crew member. They face a reconstruction, a substantial physical rehabilitation project that will occupy months of their post-landing life. And it is long enough that the psychological and perceptual dimensions of return are significant. The world has changed during their absence. Their relationships have evolved. Their own internal landscape has been altered by months of living in one of the most extreme environments human beings have ever inhabited. The 311th day back on Earth will be spent, in some important ways, still completing the journey home. As we approach the final chapters of our journey tonight, let us consider what the accumulated knowledge from long-duration spaceflight missions is teaching us and why it matters for the most ambitious human spaceflight endeavor being planned. A crewed mission to Mars, in most current planning scenarios, would involve a transit time of approximately 6 to 9 months each way, plus a surface stay of perhaps 18 months, waiting for the planetary alignment that enables a return trajectory. Total mission duration would be 2.5 to 3 years, roughly 3 times the duration of the longest missions currently being studied. The physiological challenges we have discussed tonight, bone loss, muscle atrophy, cardiovascular deconditioning, vestibular recalibration, radiation exposure, fluid shifts affecting vision would all be significantly more severe and more consequential on a Mars mission than on an ISS mission. More critically, on an ISS mission, return to Earth is always available within hours. If a medical emergency occurs, evacuation is possible. On a Mars mission, there is no evacuation option. The crew is the medical team. The resources aboard the spacecraft are the hospital. This fundamentally changes the risk calculus. Bone fractures that would be manageable on Earth become serious risks in an environment where gravity will be different. Mars' gravity is approximately 38% of Earth's, and medical intervention is limited. Vision changes that can be monitored and treated on Earth become more concerning when the patient is tens of millions of kilometers away. Every long-duration mission flown to the ISS is, in part, a data collection exercise in support of the Mars mission planning. Every physiological measurement, every rehabilitation, observation, every instance of an unexpected finding, like the vision changes of SANS or the gene expression changes of the twin study, adds to the knowledge base that will inform the medical protocols of a crew heading to Mars. The astronauts of today are, in this sense, test pilots for the journey their successors will make. As we move toward the conclusion of our journey tonight, let us step back from the specific challenges and sit with a larger insight that the entire story of human spaceflight physiology illuminates the extraordinary adaptability of the human body. Every physiological change we have discussed tonight, the cardiovascular adaptation, the bone loss, the muscle atrophy, the vestibular recalibration, the brain reorganization is not a failure of the body, it is a success. The body is not a fixed machine that breaks when conditions change. It is an adaptive biological system, continuously sensing its environment and adjusting its architecture, its structure, its function, its allocation of resources to match the demands of that environment with extraordinary precision. In microgravity, the body correctly identifies that it no longer needs to pump blood against a gravitational gradient and reduces the cardiovascular resources allocated to that task. It correctly identifies that the weight-bearing skeleton is not under load and reduces the metabolic cost of maintaining high bone density in bones that do not need it. It correctly identifies that the enormous leg muscles that propel the body across a gravitational landscape are unnecessary and reduces the caloric investment in maintaining them. These are not mistakes. They are elegant biological solutions to a changed environment. The problem, the only problem, is that the changed environment is temporary, that the adaptations that are correct for microgravity become challenges when the body is asked to return to the gravitational environment in which it evolved. The body adapted to space. It will adapt back to Earth. The process takes time, and it requires the appropriate stimuli, weight-bearing, exercise, the daily loading of a gravitational world. But it happens. Bones remineralize, muscles rebuild, the vestibular system recalibrates, cardiovascular fitness is restored. What the study of spaceflight physiology reveals is that the human body is not merely adapted to Earth. It is adaptive, capable of responding appropriately and effectively to environments that no human being experienced until 60 years ago, environments that evolution could not have anticipated. That is a remarkable thing to know about the organism you inhabit. And so we arrive, gently and without hurry, at the end of our journey together tonight. We have traveled a long way. From the launch pad and the first hours of weightlessness, through the months of adaptation to an environment the human body had never encountered in 4 billion years of biological history. We followed the cardiovascular system as it recalibrated for a world without gravitational gradients. We watched the skeleton quietly lose its density, the muscles lose their mass, the vestibular system lose its reference point. We followed the fluid upward into the head and the eyes, and we understood why vision is among the more surprising casualties of extended spaceflight. We visited the brain itself, watched it shift within the skull, watched its white matter reorganize, watched it adapt at the most fundamental neurological level to a new way of existing in space. We stood at the moment of landing and felt, through the accounts of those who have experienced it, the profound strangeness of gravity's return, the weight of the head, the unfamiliar pressure of the ground against softened feet, the dizzying richness of a world full of smells and wind, and the endless sensory texture of a living planet. We followed the rehabilitation, the patient weeks of reconstruction, the gradual reloading of bones and muscles, the careful reconditioning of a body that gave everything it had to a world it was not built for and now must be coaxed back to the world it was. And we sat with the deeper gifts that come back with the astronauts, the overview effect, that shift in perspective, that visceral understanding of Earth's fragility and humanity's unity that cannot be fully explained or fully communicated but persists long after the physiology has recovered. the understanding of what we are made of. Not just the chemistry, the calcium in the bones, the iron in the blood, the proteins in the muscles, but the deeper thing, the adaptability, the resilience, the capacity of this organism, this evolved biological system that grew up on a particular planet under a particular gravity with a particular atmospheric pressure and a particular magnetic field to exist and function and even thrive in an environment utterly unlike anything that shaped it. 311 days above Earth, 10 months of floating, 10 months of a world without weight, without weather, without the full richness of the sensory environment that evolution calibrated us for. And then the return, the long, careful, sometimes painful, ultimately triumphant return, not just to the planet, but to the body, to the weight of the head, to the pressure of a mattress, to the smell of outside air and the texture of grass and the beautiful, ordinary, almost unbearable weight of a glass of water in the hand. The astronaut who lands after 311 days is not the same person who launched. They have been changed physically, perceptually, cognitively, perhaps at the level of their DNA. The changes are documented, studied, analyzed, and published. They are the data that will help plan the missions of the future. But they are also, more quietly, a record of something that all human beings share with those extraordinary travelers, even though most of us will never leave the atmosphere. We are all, at every moment, in negotiation with the world that shaped us, the gravity we move through, the air we breathe, the light we see by, the gravitational pull that holds our blood in its proper places and our bones at their proper density and our muscles at their proper strength. We do not feel these negotiations happening. They are conducted at the cellular level, below consciousness, in the language of biology and chemistry and physics. But they are happening continuously, every day of every life. The astronaut who lands after 311 days above Earth feels them, acutely, immediately, in the weight of every limb and the ache of every load-bearing joint. And in that feeling, in that sudden, overwhelming physicality of a gravity-bound world, there is something worth carrying. Gratitude, perhaps, for the weight, for the ground, for the particular and irreplaceable experience of being a biological creature on a planet that wants, gently but firmly, to hold you down. Rest now, in that holding. The Earth has you. It has always had you. And tonight, as your body maintains its 10,000 automatic negotiations with the gravity and the pressure and the chemistry of this world, without your attention, without your effort, without your awareness, let it do its ancient and devoted work. You are exactly where you evolved to be. Thank you for exploring with us tonight. May your rest be as deep as the atmosphere is wide, and as easy as floating on the edge of space, looking down at the most beautiful object in the known universe.